Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of All Things Crime. I'm Jared, your host. I'm excited to be here. Appreciate you listening and watching on YouTube and Rumble. And got a great guest today. But before I introduce him, I just want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by MVAC Systems. MVAC is the wet vacuum DNA collection system that you all are so familiar about. We've talked about multiple cases that it's helped solve. But basically, it sprays that solution down on the surface, vacuums up the DNA, and helps investigators solve cases that they may otherwise never be able to solve. So remember MVAC Systems. We have a YouTube channel as well as lots of cases that we've solved. So feel free to visit there. And if your agency doesn't have one, boy, let them know about it. All right. So let's get to today's guest, Neama Rahmani. I got that right, correct?
You got it, Jared. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, I appreciate you being patient with me and bringing you in. So, and you know, thanks so much for making a few minutes for us today.
Oh, I'm excited to be on. First time. I've heard a lot of great things about the show, so excited to be a first-time guest on.
All right. Awesome. Appreciate that. So your resume, honestly, is so long, I have to read it. So first of all, well, you know, and maybe what we ought to do, rather than just, you know, blasting out all of these crazy accolades you have, why don't we just talk a little bit about it? You know, one of my first questions for you, Rima, is you were admitted into UCLA at 16 and you graduated from Harvard Law School by the time you were 22. So that is so far away from what most kids are doing today. What is it that drove you to want to be, you know, to do that? I think that's so telling, is what kind of a man you are, that you would be so accomplished by the time you're 22 years old.
Well, Jared, I wish I had a good answer, but basically, I'm a super nerd. My grandfather was a judge. I knew I always wanted to be a judge. So I was going to go to law school, become a prosecutor. I skipped a couple grades when I was a little bit younger. So I was a couple years ahead, finished high school at 16, was able to finish college in 3 years at 19, went straight to law school. So, you know, I don't recommend that for anyone. You know, I got kids of my own. I want them to take their time, enjoy their school years. But, you know, I made the mistake of just plowing right through. And, you know, when I went to Harvard Law School, I got in at 18, started at 19. The average starting age was 27, 28. A lot of folks with advanced degrees, years of work experience. So probably wasn't where I needed to be socially and emotionally. I think I ended up catching up later, but that's my story. So folks ask me, you know, should I do the same thing? I say, just take your time. You're going to be working the rest of your life and make sure you're ready for that law school experience. Because sometimes people go to grad school or college and not necessarily what they want to do. They end up spending years of their life, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and have to start all over. So take your time is advice I'd like to give folks that are watching and listening.
Yeah. Well, my 18-year-old right now is she's in school and, you know, as a freshman, kind of floundering on what she really wants to do. She thinks she wants to be a nurse. And I keep telling her, you know what, you're 18. If you make a mistake and you need to start over and do something different, it's okay. You've got plenty of time. You know, it seems like we have two types of kids in today's society. One, you know, the ones that are really driven, that like you, that, you know, wanted to just fire off and they want to start, you know, get their career started and get making money. And then there's others that, man, it's like they're 32 and still living in their mom's basement. So, you know, a nice in between somewhere in there would be nice.
No, I agree, Jared. And what I recommend, like I said, talking to my own kids or, you know, students in high school or college, look, if you're thinking about law, you're thinking about medicine, whatever it is, go work for a firm, go work for a judge, go work for, you know, a prosecutor's office. Medicine, go work for a hospital, go work for a doctor, you know, spend a few months there. I mean, nothing's permanent. No one's getting married, but, you know, I have people coming here. We have 150 employees at our firm. We have interns coming in and out, and some people come here and they absolutely love it, and it sort of solidifies their career path. But other people come and they say, Neema, thank God I did this because I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing this. They might not be fighters. They might not like the adversarial nature of the law. They might not like, the criminal side of things or civil or whatever the case may be, but there's really no substitute for actually going because, we all know school is great, but it doesn't necessarily prepare you for the actual substance of doing whatever you're going to do after school.
Oh, absolutely. School, in my opinion, is just a bubble, and it doesn't really reflect real life. And so unless you have some kind of an internship or something that, get out there. Well, for example, I mean, most of the people I work with are on the investigative side, detectives and CSIs. And I heard about this girl that she went through 4 years got her forensics degree. On her first crime scene, was out there puking and, having a miserable time. And she's like, I'm done. So she wasted basically 4 years of her life and, had never even, talked to or gone out with a CSI. And so I highly recommend it. Anyway, kind of a tangent, but, fun to talk about. And another thing, I have to throw this in there, Neema, is it sounds like your wife is also an attorney, but she specializes in foster care kids.
No, that's right, Jared. And, she does God's work. So anytime there's an allegation of abuse, and, there are folks who are mandatory reporters. Oftentimes, it's a teacher or a doctor that makes the report to social services, and social workers come and they take that kid away from the parents. And there's a hearing. In California, it's called a dependency hearing, but, there's similar types of hearings in every single state. And at that hearing, it's one of the only times that the parents will get appointed counsel because it's such a fundamental right. What the state wants to do is take those children away. So there's essentially quasi prosecutors. They're trying to terminate those parental rights. The parents get appointed lawyers. My wife is the third set of lawyers. She's the court appointed attorney for the child. So she'll have kids that are 2 days old. They tested positive for drugs at the hospital. They've been taken away from parents. She has other kids that are older. Maybe they're in their teens and they've been subject to severe physical and sexual abuse. But she is their legal guardian, while they're working their way through the foster care system. So she'll have anywhere from 200 to 300 kids at a time. And I could tell you, I put more than 1,000 people in federal prison, but, dealing with abused kids was probably, one of the most challenging things that I've ever seen. So, God bless her and those folks that work in our juvenile system working with kids, because it's something that is very difficult and frankly, something that was hard for even me to do.
Oh, 100%. My wife and I are parents of 3 foster kids that we adopted after a year. And so that's near and dear to my heart. And I'll tell you that just seeing what they went through, my twins were 2.5 when we adopted them. And but the condition that they were in when we first got them that first night, in fact, those first few nights were just unreal, just miserable. So yeah, but it's been a hard road, but they're well adjusted now, and we've had them 10, 11 years. So yeah, I when I hear about stories like your wife, God bless her, she's doing God's work for sure.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, and I'm sure you know this, it's really God bless you and your wife, because when you adopt a child from the foster care system, you are saving that child's life. I can't tell you, the statistics, you probably already know them, but, my wife will probably count on 1 or 2 hands the number of kids she has that even graduate high school. Kids that grow up in foster care, at least here in California, the statistics are horrifying. More than 50% of them, within 3 years of turning 18, more than 50% end up dead, trafficked, imprisoned, or homeless. They don't have a chance. So whenever they're adopted by a loving family like yours, you are truly saving that child's life. So I really tip my hat to you and your wife, not only adopting 1, but 3 children. That's amazing.
Yeah, there were 3 twins, and then the younger one's just only 16 months younger. So it was almost like getting triplets. So yeah, I went from a nice, serene life to just having 2 daughters that were almost self-sufficient to just complete chaos, man. Just these 3 little maniacs in the house, and it's a bit. You know what? I would never go back and do it differently. So
yeah, but you really changed the course of those children's lives. Obviously, your daughters are clearly older. You could have just sort of retired and, put your parenting days behind you, but you chose not to adopt one, but three. I mean, it really, anyone that's listening, anyone wants to make a difference in this world. I mean, that's really how you do so. Foster a child, adopt a child, get involved in the foster care system, because those kids, they really have no one to support them.
100%. Yeah. Most of this gray hair. Yeah. That's my boys right there. So, all right. Well, let's get back to you. You know what, man, Amy, where do I start? Let's see. So one of the main things that caught my eye about your resume was you became, you got out of law school, you went to work for a firm, and then after a little while, you became a federal prosecutor. So a couple of years doing that, correct?
Yeah. So I was a federal prosecutor for 3 years. I was a city prosecutor for a couple more years, and I loved being a prosecutor. Greatest job in the world. And the plan was, to kind of cut my teeth, get some trial experience, become a judge. And then we had some kids. We were 2 lawyers on a government salary here in LA. Financially, it was just tough. So one of us had to get a real job. And my wife said, leave the government. I go back to the private sector. So, and that one of us was me. I just said, I don't want to do defense work. I was working at a big farm, was doing, defending criminals, defending these big corporations. So, when I couldn't be a prosecutor, and I said, well, let me represent victims, folks who've been sexually assaulted, they've lost a loved one, dealt with some employment issue at work, sexually harassed, wrongfully terminated. So I started doing civil plaintiffs work. Not as good as being a prosecutor, but at least you're on the right side and you're helping folks as to defending corporations and criminals. So I'm one of the few former federal prosecutors that doesn't do any criminal defense work. Makes it a little bit unique.
Oh, that's fantastic. So during your years as a federal prosecutor, what was maybe your favorite case? Out of all the cases that you did prosecute, which one are you the most proud of?
Probably the most proud of was Logan Quiroga. He was a murderer and fugitive kingpin. He was featured on America's Most Wanted. Spent a few years tracking him down in Mexico, indicted about 7 or 8 people on the way there that were trafficking methamphetamine for him. But I would say probably the case I was most proud of, even though it really ended up not being a case, was a call I got one day. So I was prosecuting drug and human trafficking cases in San Diego along the U.S.-Mexico border. I got a call one day from one of my agents, actually one night from one of my agents. And he called me and he's like, Neama, I need you. The Border Patrol arrested someone and, she's a Persian speaker. She's frantic and we don't have a translator. So, I told my agent, I'm like, listen, my parents are Persian. I speak some Persian, but I was born here. I'm not fluent in any way. So I can try to help you out. But, if you want someone that is an actual certified translator or interpreter, I'm not your guy. He's like, no, I mean, we need anyone. So I talk to this woman who's in Border Patrol custody and, she's been apprehended. It's her husband and their child. And she is frantic. And she tells me this crazy story where her husband is a political dissident in Iran. He's a journalist. He's writing articles against the government. He's imprisoned there in Iran. Shortly after he's released, somehow they get a hold of traffickers in Iran that smuggle them to Europe. They work their way from Europe to Mexico. And then when they're in Mexico, coyotes agree to smuggle them through the hills and through the desert. Now, it's a mom and dad. They have a little bit of an older child, I think maybe 5 or 6 years old, and they have a young baby. And the traffickers say, listen, there's no way the baby, who's only a few months old, is going to be able to make it through the desert. So what we're going to do is we're going to smuggle you in, mom, dad, and the older child. And then someone's just going to walk the baby through the port, San Ysidro. So once mom and dad and the older child are arrested, the mom is freaking out. She doesn't know where her baby is. So, I get involved, even though, again, it's not a case that's been charged or anything. And, using basically the intelligence that we have, we put the word out that, look, where's this baby? And we find out that this drug trafficking organization is actually trying to sell the baby on the black market in Mexico. So I have a pretty good reputation as a pretty aggressive prosecutor. I tell my agents to tell all of our sources down in Mexico that if they harm this baby or they sell this baby, I will do everything in my power to make sure that I find the people responsible, indict them, and extradite them to the U.S. The next day, the baby is delivered and dropped off at the port of entry. So, we ended up saving this baby as a result of, my efforts. Again, it wasn't a case, wasn't anyone that was prosecuted. We ended up connecting the family with some immigration attorneys and processing their asylum application. But, it was a really good result and something that I'm proud of and I'll never forget.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.